Shalom from Jerusalem. This is TV7 Israel's daily update. And in today's edition, we will do somewhat of a follow-up to yesterday's broadcast, during the course of which we started to discuss the situation in the Gaza Strip, the complexity related to the territory at a time when you hear people like the King of Jordan, Abdullah II, coming out and stating that from their perspective, there should be only a peacekeeping force rather than a peace enforcing force, something that, of course, will allow the Islamist terrorist organization Hamas to maintain its grip over the Gaza Strip, a reality that neither Israel nor, according to what President Trump pledged, the United States could accept or would accept. Is that something that will ultimately bring about an end to President Trump's 20-point plan? Next to that, the Islamic Republic of Iran continues to develop its various arms, proxies, particularly the proxy in Lebanon, where up to today it has already, according to a variety of reports, transferred roughly $1 billion. That is quite a significant amount with which you can do quite a lot. And the situation vis-a-vis the Houthis that continue also to try and gain as many as possible dual-use components, and by the moment they receive those, to, of course, manufacture ballistic missiles and other type of munitions. To discuss those three topics, potentially even linger in one or two of those, I am delighted to have yesterday's panel also rejoin me today, to include TV7's editor-at-large, Mr. Amir Oren, Brigadier General in Reserve Doron Gavish, formerly the commander of the Israeli Air Force Air and Missile Defense, and Assistant Secretary of State for Political Affairs, formerly for Political Military Affairs, retired Brigadier General Mark Kimmett. It's always a pleasure to have all three of you. And I'd like to actually start with you, General Kimmett. Yesterday, you had wanted to provide some insight into the complexity of the ISF. What does it actually mean for the Gaza Strip at this point in time, and really the complexities that the United States, as the leading actor in this context, is facing as we're speaking today?
Well, as we started yesterday, the first issue is when you decide to have a security force of this kind, the first thing you need to do is ask the question, is it security as in peacekeeping, which is what the King of Jordan wants, or is it a peace enforcement? And everything derives from there, because those are two different chapters in the UN Chapter 6 and Chapter 7 missions. The primary mission difference, of course, is the mission, but equally important are the rules of engagement that force can use. Now, when you try to assemble that force under that chapeau, under that umbrella of the mission, you go through what we call a force generation conference, which is a really interesting process, having done and managed a couple of them for NATO operations. You fundamentally have a table of organization and equipment, which is a couple of large sheets of paper that say, these are the people we need and the positions they will fill. And then there's a separate one that says, this is the equipment that we will need. Now, it's very interesting because, Jonathan, you mentioned yesterday about some countries going in and some countries not going in. That's a whole category, and we used to joke about that. We call it the caveats, the national caveats, or the red cards. So for missions like in Bosnia and Kosovo, we would joke, often despairingly, about the countries that would put their people in, but they would not be allowed to do even the simplest of missions, such as self-defense, self-protection. Some would not wear weapons, some would wear weapons, some would not serve in certain areas, others would serve, and they were very interesting, and you had to accommodate the mission for what the country was willing to do, both because that's their preference and also because that's national law. So we used to joke about the national caveats. You can fight on Sundays, you can't fight on Mondays. Uh, and that you had to deal with as you built the table of personnel, you had to work your way around that. For example, some units would be out in the field. Others said we will only do force protection of the headquarters. And then when you have the whole issue of equipment, when we transitioned to NATO in 2006 in Afghanistan, the British wanted to be the lead nation for the South, and they said, we can take care of everything. And I said, fine, that's great, you guys can do that. And then they started backdooring me with requests to the Joint Chiefs of Staff saying, hey, can we get a couple of helicopters out of you? Can we get some supply trucks out of you? So it was and will be for the International Security Force a fairly interesting process. And candidly, I think that may be one of the reasons that if they were having a preliminary force generation conference at Doha, they didn't want to announce it to generally expose these kind of differences in who's willing to contribute, how many in number, how many months that force would stay in, what equipment they would bring in. And because they didn't want to embarrass certain nations, name and shame and blame, as we used to say, as they built the force and what they're willing to contribute and what they're not. So that's force generation in a heartbeat.
I appreciate that, Mark. Of course, we also need to take into account that those who then accepted the peacekeeping mission and limited the rules of engagement in Bosnia and Herzegovina at the time of the NATO mission ultimately stood aside and did not grant their military personnel the capacity to intervene when massacres were happening under their noses, ultimately bringing about the downfall of not one political party or government throughout Europe, to include the Netherlands, of course, where the Labour Party had total collapse and remained out of government for a couple of decades since. That is also something that those leaders will have to take into consideration. General, did you want to interject?
Absolutely. That was not my mission. That was not our mission with the Bosnia S4 and K4. That was under UNPROFOR, a UN mission that was
Right.
basically wanted to be a blue helmet. So I could tell a story at length about how the Dutch came into Afghanistan with a very tough mission in Mullah Omar's hometown because they wanted to wipe off the stain of Srebrenica.
And they did engage there, and they were quite impressive in their activities there, as well were the Germans, for instance, who for the first time engaged in offensive activities since World War II, which was also quite interesting to see the whole dynamic on that. But nonetheless, let's take it a bit closer to home, Mr. Owen. When we're talking about the Israeli involvement in this context, naturally, from a political perspective, this may raise many complexities to anyone involved. From Israel's part, Jerusalem cannot accept Hamas's survival, irrespective of what the global community demands. And therefore, the meeting between President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu on the 29th later this month is vital.
So yesterday, for some reason, President Trump raised some doubts regarding this meeting, telling reporters that Prime Minister Netanyahu wants to see him. President Trump, is willing to meet him, but it is not set yet. And that Egyptian President Assisi may also take part. So what is happening today in Miami, Florida, is that presidential emissary Steve Witkoff is seeing three of the main players there, representatives of these players of Qatar, Turkey, and Egypt. Obviously, Qatar and Turkey have some kinship with Hamas and may have some leverage over Hamas. And the issue is the transition from the first stage of the ceasefire deal, which is already 3 months old, to the second stage, which calls for disarming Hamas and which Hamas up to now has resisted. And yes, Prime Minister Netanyahu the other day has talked about the end of the 7th of October war and also said once again that if Hamas does not comply with the provisions of the second stage, Israel will undertake this chore the hard way rather than the easy way, which is diplomacy and the international force. So we are about a week and a half away from the decision point regarding Gaza.
General Gavish, I'd like to hear your take on the complexity for the IDF now to prepare, of course, within the circumstances, in the event that the 20-point plan fails to move from phase 1 to phase 2, the IDF will be expected to enter or re-enter Gaza City, something, of course, that everybody wants to avoid, to include Israel at this point. But nonetheless, to what degree does also Hamas's refusal to disarm impact the decision making in Lebanon? Namely, the Iranian proxy Hezbollah is also refusing to disarm, saying so openly, claiming that it's willing to disarm only south of the Litani River, despite the fact that it's not doing anything to bring about that reality. And quite frankly, the mandate it always was claiming to have was to defend Lebanon, so to speak, against Israel. And if it's not south of the Litani River, then what type of mandate is that?
Well, you're right, Jonathan, and we always say that everything connects to everything. But, allow me to follow up what was just mentioned by General Kimmich, because this is really what Israel was talking about for quite a long time, and this is in a way, the main concern of Israel, that at the end of the day, we would have to do the job because no one else would be willing to do the job, and other foreign officers would be willing almost to fight every day, almost in Sunday, almost Monday, almost Tuesday, but never really to do the job for us. And this is we saw it in the past so many times. Also Israel, we saw it in places when the UN were there, and it's a completely different situation. And our expectations, and I think also Trump expectations, are different from the Gaza Strip. So let's see what will happen. It is a very important, of course, meeting that is going to be held in the United States. But from the Israeli point of view, the IDF have to be prepared, and this is what he is doing to all the options, and also to the option that dismantling the Hamas would be our own job, and we would have to do it. Exactly as you said, no one really is excited about it. It's not what we wanted. It's not what we are still wanting. But we also remember that the Hamas is this brutal organization that did what they've done on the 7th of October. They didn't change their ideology. It's the same, and we cannot allow them to grow in our backyard, which is, of course, in the Gaza Strip. So this is something that Israel would have to deal with. And as you said, again, rightly, everything connected to everything. Because also in Lebanon, we see that there are a lot of statements being done about the dismantling of the Hezbollah. But at the end of the day, when the Hezbollah says no, so no one really is enforcing him to do it. And this is also an open, I would say, an open ground for unfortunate that we would find ourselves, unfortunately, in a position that we would have to do it ourselves, and to make sure that threats are not growing around us.
Thank you, General Gavish. General Kimmett, naturally, both the 20-point plan in the Gaza Strip as well as the ceasefire and the architecture surrounding that in Lebanon are the making of the United States, albeit the previous administration that brokered this ceasefire for Lebanon. I don't see a scenario in which President Trump will be happy with the outcome, considering the fact that we already hear a lot of defying statements coming out of those countries who were very pressured to accept President Trump's plan and obviously push for UN Security Council Resolution 2803 that sought to ratify this and grant it a international mandate for the purpose, of course, of a number of those countries that want to contribute forces. But once again, also in Lebanon, we see that the ceasefire is in a situation where it seems like there is no political will whatsoever. The United States has already conveyed its frustration with the Lebanese authorities time and again, including by rejecting meetings for the Lebanese Armed Forces Chief of Staff when he visited Washington, getting a cold shoulder and telling him, go back to Beirut, figure out what you need to do in order to bring about the disarmament of Hezbollah. And yet, we still don't see true movement on this case.
Yeah, I think the best we can ask for inside of Lebanon is a disarmament south of the Litani, or a weapons-free zone for Hamas south of the Litani. Look, I think the way the Lebanese government thinks is, would we rather have a situation where the United States is upset, or a situation where we try to do what the United States is demanding, but it starts another civil war? The fact remains, Hezbollah is a constituent part of the Lebanese government. They, in many ways, have a veto in certain areas. So I think they're just slow rolling us, and the best we'll get out of it is no Hezbollah and no weapons south of the Litani.
What's
If I may
slow
add,
rolling to
Jonathan.
what end? Mr. Owen, just slow rolling to what end, if you may also add that into your answer, Mr. Owen, and I'm sure General Kimmett would like to interject on that. Go ahead.
Today, another meeting was held at Nakura, just north of the Israeli-Lebanese border, on the Mediterranean coast, a meeting of the coordinating mechanism under the auspices of CENTCOM, of the U.S. Central Command. The structure is that the commanding general of RCENT, the Central Command Army Forces, General Patrick Frank, is the senior American general in Israel, and the commanding general of MARCENT, of the Central Command Marine Forces, is the chief representative to Lebanon. And he is usually chairing these meetings. Under American insistence, not only military officers from Lebanon and Israel are attending. Usually the senior Israeli officer is an Air Force Brigadier General Amit Adler, who is in charge of foreign liaison for the IDF. He is the J5 division leader for that. And on the Lebanese side, of course, his opposite number. But the Americans have insisted that a policy level representative will chair the Israeli delegation, and therefore a deputy head of the national security staff, rather than a military officer, is the head of the Israeli delegation. And the topics discussed today too include the economic, financial incentives to Lebanon in undertaking all of these commitments, disarming Hezbollah and so forth. And obviously, there is also a veiled warning. If it doesn't happen, there will be a resumption of the war. There will be more destruction, perhaps even civil war. So Lebanon had better reconsider, and its government force Hezbollah to come clean.
This brings us to the point that is Hezbollah representing the Shia community in Lebanon, or is it merely an extension of the Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps of Iran? Something that, of course, it has been, at least under the previous leadership of Hassan Nasrallah, it has been the advisory and advisor and authority when it comes to the war against Israel from its northern front. So at this point in time, I do not see also the Iranians backing down. It's quite convenient for them to divert attention from their own woes. But on that, General Gavish, can we expect the Iranians to alter course, or is it more of the same?
Well, we can hope, but it doesn't look like it, unfortunately. It looks like the Iranians are still continuing with their ideology, continuing to try and reboost their proxies. They're trying to go back and to see what they can do in Syria, of course, supporting the Hezbollah as much as they can, and also in the Gaza Strip, of course, Yemen, the Houthis, and so on. So the Iranians are continuously trying to rearm themselves. We see it in all the different areas, and we also hear the statements, which unfortunately are not on the right the direction as we would all would like to see it. So, well, the direct answer to your question would be, Jonathan, that we don't see it happening until now, and we are hoping that it will be changed in the near future.
General Kimmett, the Iranians have been quite determined to see their proxies survive, if not more than that. Rehabilitate is more accurate. Do you see them being successful on the Lebanese side, considering the fact that they have, according to reports, already transferred more than $1 billion, which is quite a lot for an Iranian proxy that is also a cartel pretty much operating in South America and Venezuela. It's very active in other locations in the drug trade and the human trafficking and such. And obviously it has streams of revenue coming from those areas of malign activities. But also the Houthis in Yemen have been quite vigorous in their efforts to strengthen themselves. They had some painful blows that slowly we're seeing it becoming more and more apparent to the level of degradation, if I may call it that, from both the American campaign and the subsequent Israeli campaign. What are we to take out of that?
Yeah, well, first of all, to answer your question about Lebanon, are they the Hezbollah? Are they a representative of the Shia, or are they a proxy of Iran? My answer would be yes, they're both. In fact, the writ of sovereignty does not exist in southern Lebanon. They are, in fact, Hezbollah, in fact, is the provider of all the social elements that are needed by the Shia in the south. Because it is funded by Lebanon, it has an ability not only to perpetuate but grow in the wake of the bombings inside of Iran. Same with the Houthis. And to some extent, same with the Iranian proxies that are operating inside of Iraq. So I think the unfortunate conclusion all of us would come to is that the proxy network that was disabled after the attack on Iran is starting to grow, and after October 7th, is starting to grow back. You say rehabilitate, I'd say regrow. And it goes back to the old expression that you always use, which is all the campaign up to this point has done is mow the grass.
Well, there are plenty of weapons in the Middle East, and all you need is money to sustain them and to fuel those in the directions of one state actor or another. And the Iranians have been utilizing their funds not to take care of their own people, which are suffering day in and day out, but regrow, as General Kimmett mentions, is quite accurate. Mr. Owen, you have 1 minute to conclude our session for today.
So exactly to segue into what you just said, there was a report coming out of Iran, whether it's authentic or not, perhaps it's premature to say, that there is growing frustration within the presidency. Of course, the government is separate from the regime, but there was an expression of frustration by people close to the president regarding the Revolutionary Guards. Maybe it's the beginning of some fissures, but only the supreme leader, of course, will have the final word.
Indeed. Well, this is all the time that we have for today. I'd like to initially thank General Kimmett, General Gavish, and Mr. Oren for all of your insight. And I'd like to thank all of you at home as well. And also mention this will be our last update for the next 2 weeks, roughly. Stay up to date on our Christmas broadcast schedule on our website at www.tv7israelnews.com. We will have a couple of recordings on a weekly basis to keep you up to date, but make sure you are apprised of our schedule. With that, wishing you a Shabbat Shalom. I will be here tonight for TV7 Israel News, but until then, Shalom from Jerusalem.
Jerusalem Studio, now available on Spotify.
For more of TV7's productions and editorials, we invite you to visit our website at www.tv7israelnews.com.